I was part of the most elite, well-trained unit in the United States Navy for almost 10 years. It's not the Navy SEALs, my friend. It's a Navy band. So after a few weeks in the band, just getting my foot in the door, meeting all the guys in the band, getting used to the travel, the boss came down one day and he said, "Hey guys, got a really good trip coming up in 2 weeks. You're going to go out to Bangladesh." And, I think maybe I've heard the word Bangladesh before, but we all got out a map and had to look it up. It was like early computer days. Believe it or not, you couldn't look stuff up on Google Maps back then. So, we were getting out the Lonely Planet guide and, Bangladesh, what's it got there? And, for one thing, it's a very poor country. And when we first flew in, we landed, the embassy people picked us up. And as we were driving out of the airport, it's really an odd feeling. We were in these big SUVs and they were telling us, don't roll down the windows, don't, make eye contact with people. And the whole time that we went from the airport to the embassy, we had people on both sides of the car that were essentially begging for money and following the car the whole time that we went on this route. It was a really odd introduction to the country. And every corner you went around, every little street you went down, there were just people everywhere. People on horse-drawn carriages, people carrying big bales of hay, just walking down the street with no shoes, and just streams and streams of people everywhere. And then out of all that commotion, the guys in the embassy said, "Hey, we're going to stop. We're going to show you this old palace. It's called Ahsan Manzil." And then so out of all this hectic stuff, we pull up to this residence, they open the gates, we drive right into the middle part there, and they close the gates, and then no one around us all of a sudden. You just want to take a breath like, oh my God, what just happened? And, you look up and there's this big, beautiful palace. Looks like you're in France that's there. Yeah, so we got in the Suburbans again. We took off out of the palace there and went down. And then the chief at that time, that was Scott Davenport, said, "Hey guys, you know what? We're going to load everything. All we need is our marching gear, and we're going to head up to a little city called Chittigong, and we're going to do a ceremony there." And sure enough, we grab our stuff, and what that meant is for the band. The bass player in the band, he had to grab a tuba instead of his bass guitar. And then the drummer, he brought a snare. And then someone else would go play bass drum. And then the piano player usually would grab cymbals. And then everyone else would grab their instruments. And even at that point, I was playing clarinet instead of saxophone in the marching band. So we grab our marching instruments. And at that time, there were 15 of us. And they jammed us on this really old, decrepit, like Soviet-era transport plane that the Bangladeshi army, had. This is not a picture of the actual plane. It was a lot sadder than this. And when you got on the inside, it was leaking oil, and it was really loud. Fortunately, it was a very short trip. Chittagong's only 100-something miles away. That's just over 200 kilometers. And so we made the little journey. We land over there. We get out and met the Bangladeshi army. And the guys were there. The band was off to the side. So, of course, we go say hi to the guys in the band. They, one of them spoke English. And really, really nice. And they thought our instruments were cool. We had a lot of really nice high-end Selmer saxophones and shiny trumpets and everything. And, we exchanged pleasantries, and then we had a ceremony. So we played American marching music, and the Bangladeshi army guys played their variation of it. It was really nice. And at the end of that ceremony, we were kind of just shooting the shit with everybody. And somebody, broke out the beers. And one of the first guys we spoke to, and he spoke perfect English, was the biggest motherfucker you've ever seen, like almost out of a movie. And he was this really massive dude, and he was wearing khakis at the time. And I noticed he had a frickin' Special Forces pin on. And of course, so someone was like, "Hey, how did you get that?" He said, "Oh, I went to train with the United States Navy, and I trained with the SEALs, and I, went through their full training course and got my special warfare badge. And, now I wear it as part of the Bangladeshi Navy. And you just had to think, oh my God, this guy is a serious badass. So, we ended the ceremony, had a few beers, and then we get back on the creaky old plane and flew back to Dhaka. And that whole part of the trip went very quickly. It was kind of like in and out. We stayed one night in a hotel. We're on the plane the next day flying back. So this trip was sandwiched in between a few other trips. And, the band had been on the road for a while. So some of the married guys were probably a little antsy, ready to get back. And then so we get through with Chittagong, fly back to Dhaka. And the next day, same thing. We're going to jump on the C-130 and fly straight back to Japan. And that would have been, a number of hours in the plane. And we take off and we're flying. And, usually the airplane pilots knew us pretty well. We were normally their only cargo at the time, or maybe they would take a little bit of cargo and the band would take up the rest of the plane. So, obviously easy people to deal with. They were all happy. We would shoot the shit and talk while we were flying. Just logged hours and hours and hours on these planes. And so as we're up there talking to the pilot, it was the first time I'd ever seen like a red light on the plane start flashing. And the pilots were like, hey, guys, why don't you go back to your seats? Just, buckle up. And so we go back to our seats. We buckle up. We hear them talking on the headsets. And they're talking to each other, it sounds like a radio tower. And like, oh, hey. And they come over the mic. Guys, we're making an emergency landing. Just stay buckled in. Nothing to worry about. No problem. And the plane just makes a big banking turn. And we come down and land. We don't even know where we're at this point. And then so we roll up on this little, it was a military base. And roll up on this military base and come to a stop. And then the pilot gets up and comes back. Sorry, guys, we had a mechanical issue. And we've got to wait for a part. We're probably going to be here a couple of days. We've got some folks coming to pick you up here in a minute. And we're in Pattaya Beach, Thailand. And, probably an hour later, here comes Suburbans. And they pick us up and just say, hey, leave all your instruments, guys. You're going to have a couple of days off. We didn't have any gigs, but we do have some stuff planned for you. So got into the Suburbans, and there was a guy from the embassy, but I don't think he worked directly with the embassy, but real nice guy. And he said, hey, I'm going to take you down, and we're going to show you guys around. Just going to have a good time over the next couple of days. You're on per diem, and we've got you a nice hotel to stay in, so it should be a good little mini vacation. And, of course, he takes us down to the beach, and, beautiful, like, sand beaches, amazing crystal clear water. And one of the things I remember is the embassy staff, the first place he took us was down to a pier. And they had this long pier, same thing on a beautiful beach out there. And he said, this is my favorite seafood restaurant, and you get an added bonus. So, as we're walking out onto this pier, I noticed there's a few little bitty restaurants scattered around a central plaza that's out on the pier. And in the middle, there was a ring. It looks like a boxing ring sitting in the middle. And at the moment, everybody was up and talking and ordering food and everything. So, we go over there, and it was so inexpensive. I think I paid like $2 and I got this massive meal of fresh shrimp and seafood with fried rice and all that. And, beer was a quarter or something like that. So terribly inexpensive. And we all get our beers and our food, and he's like, all right, guys, come sit down on the table over here. They're about to start in a minute. And we're like, oh, okay, what's going on? So we sit down, and here come these kickboxers. They get into the ring, and like, this is not joking around for the tourists. These guys are like seasoned pros. They get into the ring and just start wailing on each other. And there's a referee. They're calling the whole thing. They got the bell going. And so as we're like chowing down and starting to drink, it was a great way to start the trip and a really interesting part of being in Pattaya Beach. And so, that was a pretty brief trip, but indicative of what would happen over the next couple of years for me in the 7th Fleet Band in Japan. Kind of one trip where you'd get back, you'd have maybe 2 or 3 that were already on the books. And by the time you got back, the boss would say, oh, we added this place and that place. So you're going to Singapore. And then, everyone wanted to go to Australia. We hadn't been there yet. But, when we got back, the boss was kind of giving us our schedule. And in the next series, I'm going to talk a little bit about going out on town and my first time to see a really famous artist play in Japan. And that was when Bob Menser came to town. And hey, I'll tell you about that next time when we get together. And I hope you all have a great week. Fair winds and following seas.